Sullivan. Mr. Braley for questions, please.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I want to focus on the last 2 minutes at the Deepwater Horizon well right before the explosion that triggered this catastrophic event. Because when I go over this accident in my head, I try to understand what was in place to protect the workers from a sudden event like this blowout. And I'd like to talk about what happened just before the explosion. Can we bring up the Halliburton data stream on screen at this point? Mr. Probert, you testified that part of your function on this particular well was to provide real-time data collection. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And your company produced this particular chart to us as part of the contract you had with BP to perform monitoring of the mud and other data on this rig. Is that your understanding?
That's correct.
Are you generally familiar with how this type of a chart is used in well monitoring?
Generally, yes.
Generally. What this chart shows is what was happening inside the well and on the rig in the final 2 hours before the explosion. And if you look, this chart is broken down into time intervals that are recorded beginning at 2010, which would have been 8:10 p.m. that evening, correct?
Mr. Braley, if may. It's exhibit number 5. There should be an exhibit book there if you want to look at it, Mr. Probert. Give you a little extra time there, Bruce. Okay. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. It's exhibit number 5. Go ahead.
So this covers a data interval from 2010 or 8:10 p.m. on April 20th to 2150, which would have been 9:50 that evening. Is that the time frame we're talking about?
It would appear to be so, yes.
Yes, and if you look at this chart, there are several abnormal appearing entries where a line dramatically goes vertical during a time interval between 2146 and 2148. You see that?
I see that.
And what this suggests is that the pressure in the standpipe at that moment shot up from 500 psi, pounds per square inch, to almost 3,500 psi in the space of about 2 minutes. And that was immediately before the explosion, correct?
That's immediately before the contact was lost with the rig, yes.
Right. So, Mr. Probert, this is your company's data. What does this tell us?
What it says is that at some point within 2 minutes or so of the loss of the transmission, that there was a significant increase in standpipe pressure.
All right. And what's the significance of that to people monitoring this well for safety and security reasons?
The significance of this to all parties who would have had access to this data and also standard gauges which are present on the rig would show that this would be a significant red flag.
And in addition to gauges and this printout, are there any other type of built-in safety devices that would trigger a shutdown of the rig?
I would have to defer that question to Mr. Newman as to whether or not there are any shutdown processes on the rig.
All right. Mr. Newman, are you prepared to answer that question?
If you could rephrase the question for me, Representative, I'd be happy to take a shot.
Well, have you ever had surgery, Mr. Newman?
I have had surgery.
And right when you're undergoing anesthesia, one of the last things that happens before you're put under is they put a pulse oximeter on your finger to monitor your oxygen saturation level. Do you remember that, a little device goes over your finger?
The surgery I underwent, sir, was a bit traumatic, and I was effectively incapacitated in advance of the surgery, so I don't remember.
Just accept for the purpose of my question, that's what happens to most people, that they actually do monitor your oxygen saturation because they don't want you to die on the operating table.
I'll take your word for it, sir.
And there are built into that machine that the anesthesiologist uses alarm defaults when your saturation level gets to a certain level that it's considered hypoxic. Everybody in that operating room needs to know that, okay? My question for you is, in this particular setting, what type of alarm bells, whistles, alerts, other than a pressure gauge, do people working on that rig have available to them to tell them they've got a catastrophic problem that's unfolding?
Well, there are a number of early warning indicators that are present on a drilling rig that would alarm for the individuals who are monitoring those to give them an indication. Which particular alarms would have been triggered in this instance depends on exactly what was happening, and I don't know the answer to the question about exactly what was happening.
How do we find out that information? How are those alarms recorded? What logs are kept? And what additional information do we know to get to the bottom of what was transpiring on that rig?
The alarms are monitored on the rig through what we refer to as VMS, a vessel management system. Those alarms are logged, and a record is kept of that, but that VMS exists only on the rig. It's not transmitted off the rig, and so the VMS system, along with the logs of the VMS system, would have gone down with the vessel.
So you have no mirrored backup data device so that that information is recorded at some other location than on the rig itself?
We do not have real-time off-rig monitoring of what's going on the vessel.
Do you think that's a failure in the fail-safe system that is currently used within the industry to help understand the events of a catastrophe like this and learn from it?
Because though the decisions regarding continuation of the drilling operations or suspension of the drilling operations are typically taken at the rig site, the first place we want those alarms present is at the rig site.
But you're aware that technology exists. It's used every day in businesses all over the country, where as soon as a bit of information is recorded at a central location, it can be immediately recorded at a distant site just to avoid this type of catastrophe from preventing that information from being lost forever.
I'm aware of that technology existing, and in fact, the reason we have the records you're showing us now are because that technology was employed on this particular operation.
For this function that we're seeing on this chart, but not the other recorded data that you've described in your testimony.
Not a real-time replication of the alarm logs.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Braley. Mr. Griffiths for questions.